The main point is to understand that bringing down Assad was a long-term Israel-U.S. aim. And what happened was the outcome of a long-term Israeli-U.S. game. We know back in 2001 already, the U.S. game plan based on an Israeli-U.S. agreement and understanding, which was to change the face of the Middle East by bringing down actually 7 regimes that were pro-Palestinian. And these were spelled out to our general, former NATO Supreme Commander, General Wesley Clark. He was shown famously the piece of paper that said 7 wars in 5 years: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Sudan, Somalia, and Libya. And the idea was these are oppositionist states, which meant they support the Palestinian cause. And so it's not the character of the internal regimes, it is their geopolitics that was the issue. And the idea was we need to bring them down. And Netanyahu's been the main cheerleader of war across the Middle East and the Horn of Africa from the 1990s onward. And the U.S. has used its normal tools, its economic sanctions, its financial sanctions, its CIA operations, its support for jihadists, its direct military engagement. In each of those places, 6 out of 7 have been in outright war. NATO brought down Libya. The United States supported the destruction of Somalia. The U.S. actively broke apart Sudan. The United States backed Israel to invade Lebanon on several occasions. The U.S. used the CIA and its sanctions and its direct war to bring down Assad. The U.S. invaded Iraq. So this game plan didn't work on the 5-year timeline. It didn't work, in my view, on any other standard as well, other than its brutality and its success eventually in actually changing regimes, not in making peace, not in solving problems, not in accomplishing anything other than bloodshed, but it has been carried out. And so the question of the internal character of the Syrian regime is really a side point, to tell you the truth. The main point is that this was part of a U.S. plan all along to bring down regimes in the Middle East that Israel deemed to be supportive of Hamas and Hezbollah and other anti-Israel forces.
What do you think might be the U.S. approach to the HTS? There are some reports about a possible election in Syria in 3 to 4 years after drawing a constitution, and some are reporting that the U.S. might be negotiating some understanding between its traditional ally, the Syrian, the Kurdish Democratic Forces in the northeast, and the HTS. Any idea what might happen on that front?
Let's just say, let's talk in 4 years. I hope we talk before 4 years. This is all fantasy land. I don't think Syria is going to be a stable, peaceful country of a liberal or illiberal democracy. We've got a lot of head. And all of this, it would be like asking me in 2001, what's going to happen in the 2005 Afghanistan elections? The whole thing is crass game playing with a lot of powers dividing up Syria right now, with Israel taking Syrian territory, bombing Syria as we speak, with Turkey having its machinations. So there's a lot ahead.
Yeah, no, I I asked the question not because I'm interested in the election,
Yes.
but to understand the alliance. Because I mean, if you talk about the Afghanistan election, one could have easily said that the strategy is very clear that they would back the Northern Alliance, the Turkish and the Hazaras and the other non-Pashtun groups, and then they are out there to eliminate the Pashtun and led the Taliban's here. But here we are confused because the HTS was offshoot of Al-Qaeda, which was once designated which is still designated as terrorist, and on the other hand, the SDF is its traditional ally. So I'm just
Well, I think one thing that's confusing is that Al Qaeda also is a creation of the CIA.
uh-huh.
So it's not so clear, and it's been said at times that the Pentagon and the CIA were fighting on opposite sides. U.S. foreign policy is a morass of tactics and imbecility, and the creation of Al Qaeda, starting in Afghanistan with the Mujahideen in 1979, is exactly that. The U.S. has long used jihadists to fight its battles against the Soviet Union or against supposed Israel opponents and so forth. So the reason that it's murky is that it's not only murky, it has never made much sense, U.S. policy, and it doesn't work in the end. So whether HTS is friend or foe, it's both. This has been the game all along for the U.S.
To talk about one last murky question in terms as far as Syria is concerned is what are your thoughts about U.S. Turkey relationship as far as Syria goes? Because there's tremendous contradiction as far as the Kurdish movement in northeast and the north of Syria is concerned, and Turkey and U.S. are also NATO quote unquote allies. What do you have in mind in this regard?
More and more contradictions. Obviously, Turkey has its own history and interests. It's a major regional power. Turkey is also rather vulnerable financially in the past decade. Basically, Turkey had a financial crisis that resulted in part from a geopolitical crisis that itself is murky, an attempted coup against Erdogan that led to a downward spiral financially, and Turkey therefore is vulnerable financially to U.S. pressures, but it has very different interests from the U.S. And it's focused on its regional power, it's focused on the Kurds, and the idea that both are allies, a little bit complicated. And remember also that Turkey is an aspirant of the BRICS countries, and I think will become a BRICS member country at some point. So the U.S. and Turkish interests are definitely not strictly aligned by any means. But on the other hand, Turkey has vulnerabilities to U.S. pressure. This is certainly the case.
Israel has accomplished the impossible. It has united Sunnis and Shia against it and us. And far from producing a coalition composed of Israel and the Gulf Arabs directed against Iran, Israel is now driving Iran and the Gulf Arabs together in an effort to balance Israel, which has established its hegemony in the Levant and threatens further expansion. If you doubt that, look at the map of Greater Israel that is on the Foreign Ministry website, showing Israel extending to the Nile and the Euphrates, with everything in between, including parts of Saudi Arabia, Iraq, all of Syria, Lebanon, and of course the Sinai and Egypt east of the Nile. This is not the sort of posture that will enable Israel to exercise influence, and to the extent the United States does not stand firmly against it, we have zero influence in the region. Finally, you asked about Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. This is a case of a very politically wily group, aided by us, by the Israelis, but also trained largely by the Turks with us, that has successfully conquered Syria, wants to have a united Syria. Its interests coincide with those of Turkey, which also wants a united Syria so it can clobber the Kurds in the northeast and get rid of the threat that they pose to Turkish domestic tranquility. Israel wants to fragment Syria. It's always wanted that. It hopes it will break up into 4 or 5 little statelets, which Israel then can manipulate to its advantage. And there's now a direct conflict between Turkey and Syria, which will be very interesting to watch play out. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has put on a very good show of being a bunch of cuddly liberal democratic jihadis, which strikes me as a bit of a contradiction in terms, but it's essential if they're going to get Western aid for the reconstruction of Syria. And so I appreciate what they're doing. I note, however, that there have been massacres of Alawites. There have been murders of Christians. There have been other atrocities committed by elements of the loose coalition led by HTS that is now in power. And the fact that Shara, formerly known as Al-Julani, now wears an Armani suit is not convincing evidence that we're not facing an extremist regime in Damascus. That concerns the Gulf Arabs terribly. You know, they were all for backing Sunni extremists against the Shia. They've overcome that. They've reconciled with Iraq under Shia rule. They have not reconciled with Hezbollah in Lebanon, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them do that. They do not want a Salafi extremist group running Syria. In that area, their interests coincide with those of Russia. Russia is what, 15, Scott, you'll correct me, 15+% Muslim, and very concerned about the spread of extremism among its Muslim population, and very determined not to see Syria move in that direction. That was one of the reasons, among several others, that the Russians came into Syria to back the Assad government. So we now have the Saudis and others competing for influence in Syria, primarily to preempt that kind of extremism from taking hold. How successful this will be, I don't know. But the Chinese brokered rapprochement with Iran is maturing. It is accelerating. It is growing. It is not disappearing. And this illustrates a point that Israel has established its military hegemony at the expense of its total isolation.
Whenever you see a Western media outlet, mainstream Western media outlet, say unnamed Iranian officials, assume that it's a lie, that they just fabricated it. That should be the assumption from the very beginning. Reuters especially does that a lot, but so does the New York Times and others. Whenever they say an unnamed Iranian official said this, you can be pretty sure that they're not telling the truth. No, I don't think that was ever the problem for Iran. The problem was that the tilt towards Saudi Arabia and the Emirates came at the expense of the relationship with Iran. It did not add to the list of countries that Syria had better relations with. They decreased their relationship with Iran and increased their relationship with these two countries. So that obviously was not a true statement. But it came at a big cost for Syria because the Syrians expelled most of the forces that the Iranians had sent to help them against ISIS and al-Qaeda. And when the attack came, and the Syrian armed forces were collapsing, basically because of well over a decade of sanctions and occupation, and the Americans were stealing all the oil, and they continue to steal all the oil and the wheat and the grain from the farmlands in eastern Syria, where most of Syria's agricultural products are come from. All of these are being stolen by the Americans. Crushing sanctions, dirty war, all of these made the economy much weaker. Syria last year in 2024, the size of the economy was 15% of the size of the economy in 2010. So 15% of the economy, it just collapsed. And so soldiers were impoverished. Everyone was impoverished. And that is why it fell, because the country was broken. But there were very few people to help the people of Syria. The Saudis and the Emiratis didn't do anything. They didn't help rebuild the country. And so what happened was that the Syrian government lost the ability to defend itself, but it didn't gain anything in return, or its ability to defend itself weakened. However, when Syria was collapsing, Iran was prepared to support Syria. But it was very difficult because Iran had to mobilize forces and send them all the way to Syria. And the collapse was very rapid. And there were other complications as well. So Iran didn't want to see Syria collapse. Iran does not want to see people slaughtered by al-Qaeda and ISIS. But let me put it this way. The fall of Syria was a tactical victory for Netanyahu and the Netanyahu-Erdogan alliance, because they are allies. We have to remember that over the past 15, 16 months, Erdogan has been sending oil to fuel the genocide in Gaza. The oil comes from Baku, and it's cheap oil. And some of Syrian oil also goes through Turkey to Haifa, the port in occupied Palestine. So they've always had an alliance, despite the rhetoric coming from Ankara. Erdogan has done a great deal to help the Israeli regime carry out the genocide. And it's clear that what happened in Syria was in full coordination. There was full coordination between Biden, Netanyahu, and Erdogan. Each of them got a piece of the cake, although I don't think that it's going to go well for any of them. But so it was a tactical defeat. But I think in the long run, it is actually a defeat for those who set out to destroy Syria and occupy the country, meaning Erdogan, Netanyahu, and the United States, because Syria is broken, and now they own it. And they are the ones who are going to have to pay. And the country cannot be fixed with a few $1 billion. Also, Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda and its allies are not going to be able to get the support of the people of Syria. We already see that there's heavy fighting in the east with the US-backed Kurdish forces. We see that in the south, the Druze, they are not prepared to allow this Al-Qaeda or Jolani government to expand their influence in territories that they control. And in the rest of the country, there is chaos. And to be very blunt, Iran has been vindicated, because we are seeing every day new footage of atrocities being carried out by these terror groups. And during the previous decade, Iran was constantly attacked for allegedly supporting a dictator. Now, the Iranians were never fans of the Syrian government. After all, it was ruled by the Ba'athist Party, and another faction of the Ba'athist Party invaded Iran in the 1980s. Of course, the two factions were always at odds with each other, but in any case, it's not exactly a party that Iran loves. But Iran always said that whatever whatever the Ba'athist government is, whatever President Assad's government is, it is better than Al Qaeda and ISIS. And I think much of the world agrees with that. Only in the West was it otherwise, and Arab regimes that were supporting the dirty war through Al Jazeera and other networks, they were propagating Al Qaeda. And so many people in the region fell into the trap of sectarianism or racial hatred or religious hatred. And all of these tools were used in order to demonize Iran and to demonize the Syrian government. But I think now it's becoming increasingly clear when the so-called foreign minister of Al Qaeda has has such a friendly a meeting with the former British Prime Minister who actually carried out the war in Iraq. I think those people who are sane and normal and who are not sectarian or biased see the reality of what happened in Syria. So Iran has been vindicated. Every day that goes by, Iran is increasingly vindicated. And those pretenders who said that they supported Palestine or the people of Syria, I think they've been exposed. So in the long term, what's happening in Syria is not going to go well for those who are now occupying it, in my opinion. And I think they're also the culture of this extremist organization can expand into Turkey itself. It can expand into countries in the region, which are all in the American camp. Jordan feels threatened. Egypt feels threatened. Saudi Arabia feels threatened. And this is not necessarily good news for the United States. So I don't think Jolani's rule is going to last very long. I don't know when it will come to an end. But I think that Mr. Erdogan, from Mr. Erdogan, from what I'm hearing from friends who are in his party and others in Turkey, he is already regretting, or the people around him are already regretting what's happened. In fact, the expectation was not to take, they didn't expect to take Syria. When Al-Qaeda attacked, they were hoping to reach West Aleppo so that Mr. Erdogan could have a stronger hand at the negotiating table with the Syrians and to put pressure on the Syrians to actually negotiate with them. But everything fell apart, and which was unexpected for all of us. And so now they have to pay for the whole country, and the country is in ruins.
What would be Iran's relationship with the HTS? Would it have a diplomatic relationship, or there would be no relationship?
No, Iran definitely will not have a good relationship with HTS. HTS is a terror organization. It is Al-Qaeda. When HTS separated from Al-Qaeda, it did so with the consent of Al-Qaeda because it was just a PR move. I actually tweeted the ceremony where they separated. It was like a husband and wife who loved each other. They separated because they wanted other, they out of necessity, now not out of dislike. And both were saying, yes, I support the other side. So if someone looks this up on my Twitter account, they can see it. When HTS separated from Al-Qaeda, Jolani praised Al-Qaeda and he praised Osama bin Laden and he praised all of his colleagues and who worked with him. So there's no ideological separation. There's no ideological difference between ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and HTS. We have to remember that Jolani was the deputy of ISIS. When it was the Islamic State of Iraq, he was the deputy of Abu Bakr Baghdadi. Jolani murdered thousands of people in Iraq in car bombs. So this is not a sane person. This is not a normal human being that Iran can have some sort of meaningful relationship with. And in fact, I think, as I said, what we're now seeing is a vindication of Iran. Iran wants to see Syria strong and stable, and but now the burden is not on Iran's shoulders, and the money that Iran spent to prop up Syria uh, is no longer being spent there. So Iran doesn't have to send Syria free food or free gasoline or free oil or free medicine. That was a burden for Iran, and now the burden is on Mr. Erdogan and on Qatar and whoever else is in charge of the country, because obviously Jolani isn't in charge. So they're the ones who are going to have to cough up this money. And the situation today is much worse than what it was back then. So back then it was the Iranians, the Russians, the Iraqis, and the Algerians who were supporting the Algerians to a lesser extent. Their economy was facing more greater difficulty, but who are helping the Syrian people. Now this has to be done by Mr. Erdogan. And now it's not their burden anymore. And Mr. Erdogan and Qatar have to pay for this mess that they've created, and it's going to be very costly. And the situation today in Syria is much worse than it was before.
The problem is, to answer that question honestly, and I will, it requires a very brutal assessment of the Arab world. And I don't want to come across as racist. I don't want to come across as Islamic phobic. But let's just be straight up honest. The Arab world is a catastrophe. That doesn't mean that the Arab people are, problematic. I believe that, we always talk of the Arab street, and how rulers have to pay attention to the Arab street, pay attention to the souk, the market, the will of the people. But for the most part, the Arab Spring that was supposed to sweep out all these old oligarchs and such, it didn't. You had something happened in Tunisia that has been, it has not manifested itself the way I think people wanted. Egypt, yes, we saw the elimination of one dictator replaced by another, and nowhere else. I mean, they were, the thought was that Bashar al-Assad would be swept aside, but it took another 14 years, 13, 14 years for that to happen, and it wasn't because of the Arab street; it was because of CIA money. So.
And Libya was a catastrophe.
Libya
split between
was 100% catastrophe. The elimination of Bashar al-Assad, of
Gaddafi.
Gaddafi, and that serves as a model. But before that, we knew that about Iraq, the elimination of Saddam Hussein.
Mm-hmm.
And then take a look at what happened in Iraq. Iraq is still mortally wounded. It hasn't recovered from that. And I don't think we've seen the last of Iraq. I think you're going to see what happened in the earthquake of the fall of Bashar al-Assad. I think will create geopolitical tremors that will crash in on Iraq in a potentially catastrophic manner. So, and the reason for all of this is because the Arab leaders, the Arab world is so fundamentally weak.
Do you mean, sorry for interrupt, do you mean it might trigger the old civil war, the Sunni resistance or civil war against the Shia, that kind of thing?
I think we may be looking at a resurgence of ISIS
Mm-hmm.
and Al-Qaeda and Sunni Islamic extremism
Mm-hmm.
that will be used by Turkey to restore the vilayet of Mosul and Kirkuk to Turkey proper, which they believe historically should have been the case at the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, if it weren't for the British arbitrarily drawing lines on a map. That's what I'm talking about. And for Iraq to lose those oil fields in the north and to lose that territory, it would be, it changes fundamentally what Iraq, is. This is what I'm talking about. This isn't an Arab Spring. This is basically what we're going to be seeing, I think, in the Middle East is all of the lines that were drawn on the map with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire are going to be erased, and you're going to see a free-for-all of violence in the region. That's the potential. I hope that's not the case, but one of the reasons why I believe it will be the case is that Arab leadership is horrific, totally out of touch with the needs, wants, desires of the people. And as a result, the frustration that is felt amongst the people gets captured by Islamic extremist movements that have, and this is my belief. I don't pretend to be an expert on Islam at all. Um, I have spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I have spent a lot of time talking with um, Shia Sunni clerics. Um, I have studied Sufism, not to become a adherent, but just because as I read the history of the region, Sufism plays such an important role. I've delved into the theological differences between the Ismailis and Shia faith, the Alawites, and other Shia offshoots. For instance, that which the Houthi embrace. I've studied the main schools of thought of the Sunni faith. I've studied the roots of Wahhabism and Salafism. Um, but I will admit to having passing or superficial knowledge. I am not a student of the Hadith. I cannot quote the Quran convincingly. Um, so I'm left to having to listen to people explain Islam to me and decide whether they're credible or not. And as a human being, I have decided to give more credence to those Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, who have said that Islam is a religion of peace, and that Islam is not a religion that seeks to conquer by the sword and to forcefully compel people to yield to their faith, etc. Um, that may be the case, but I will also say that Islam contains a component of violence that is either being isolated and perverted in the cause of Islamic extremism or is the genuine true heart of Islam. I mean, I find it interesting that those elements that Salafism, Wahhabism, that go back to the traditional roots of Islam, to say this is the Islam of Muhammad, the Prophet, are violent. And it's those who seek peace actually are reinterpreting or reimagining Islam in the context of the modern world and modern reality. Um, so it's a tough struggle, and it's one that's come out with Syria. I am disgusted by people I thought were uh, again, this I don't mean to insult, but westernized Muslims. What I mean by that is Muslims that can live in America at peace, practice their religion as they see fit, but seek to integrate into American society in a non-threatening manner, because we're a nation that accepts all religions. We're a nation that accepts people's ability to have different beliefs. And so when I look at Muslims in America, I don't feel inherently threatened until I realize now that many of them harbor in their hearts this desire for Islamic extremism. And it came out when they cheer the collapse of Bashar al-Assad and praise Jolani and Al-Qaeda, ignoring the ISIS past or writing it off as this is the will of God, this is legitimate Sharia law being finally coming into fruition. I say, well, that is totally incompatible with me, the West, and others. If that's who you are, then we will be in an existential life and death struggle. Because what you're talking about being put in place inside Syria today is incompatible with international law as set forth by the United Nations Charter. That cannot be allowed to happen. And yet, when you look at the Islamic world, that appears to be that which is bubbling up inside various nations throughout the Middle East because of the inadequacy of their leadership, because the people feel abandoned by the secular leadership that they have. They turn to their faith, and their faith isn't state-controlled religion, but rather the religion of the Islamist extremists, the Wahhabists, the Salafists. And maybe that's the true face of Islam. Um, and so that's where I come from on the Syrian problem, because to me, the way many people have reacted to the fall of Bashar al-Assad, look, they say he's horrible, he did this, he did that, he did this, he did that, and therefore he must be gone. Okay, but to replace him with Jolani and al-Qaeda, that's not okay. And to pretend that the Syrian resistance isn't that is a lie, because that is the Syrian resistance, because the Syrian resistance was created not by the legitimate needs, wants, and desires of the Syrian people, but rather that which is imposed on them by outside powers, by Turkey, by Qatar, by the United Arab Emirates, by Saudi Arabia, by the United States, Great Britain, and others who poured billions of dollars into creating an anti-Assad resistance, including in the United States, acknowledging straight up that al-Qaeda in this case is our ally, because al-Qaeda is enabling the diminishment of Assad. Um, that that cannot be supported. I won't support it, and I know I've disappointed a lot of people who have talked with me about the situation in Syria. But I'm a black and white kind of guy, um, and if you're sympathetic or supportive of Salafism, Wahhabism, Al Qaeda, and ISIS, you're evil. And according to the tenets of Islam that were presented to me by, I would call, moderate Muslim clerics, they agree that that's evil, and you have to agree that that's a deviation from the path of peace that Islam is supposed to be on. And yet, many Muslims appear to speak with two faces on this issue, pretend to be a religion of peace up front, but secretly praise what happened and want this. And that's problematic. And that's where I come. I know I probably just irritated 2 billion people, but you asked me a question, I gave you an answer. It's an honest answer that comes from, from an honest place.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to recognize that the Arab Spring was a kind of cocktail of at least a few things. There was genuine anger, frustration against corruption and long dynastic rule that were not necessarily responsive to people. Then there was also the element of resistance against foreign invasion. This was true in Libya, this was true in Syria, this was true in Iraq. And then finally, there were divisions within communities, which was definitely more true in Iraq and less true perhaps in Libya and somewhere in the middle in Syria. And Patrick Coburn, for instance, says that it's essential to recognize all these elements. Otherwise, one arrives at the conclusion of excessive demonization of the old regimes in this naive hope that democracy would emerge from that. I wanted to ask you, though, as you were answering me, it seems to me that you have put less emphasis on groups of people, naive, maybe, victims of propaganda, who might also be cheering the HTS because it is presented as an alternative to a dictator, and also in wrongly as a moderate, diversity-friendly, nationalist Syrian element or entity. So I'm not sure if everyone that's supporting the fall of Assad is necessarily coming from the Sunni or Salafi Wahhabi jubilation of fall of a secular government. Your response?
Well, again, I at one time supported that thesis, but dig deeper into these people. I mean, the first thing comes out from these people who say, I'm not a Salafist, I'm not a Wahhabist. First thing they say is Hamas, 1982. And they start throwing out numbers, 20,000, 40,000. And the brutal slaughter of these innocent people by Hafez al-Assad. And I said, but what about the Muslim Brotherhood? And they, no, no, no. And that immediately discredits them in my book. If you don't understand what the Muslim Brotherhood was, what the Muslim Brotherhood was trying to do, and then you have to go back even further. When we speak of Syria, what are we talking about? What is Syria? It's a fake artificial state created by the French in the aftermath of the Ottoman Empire, cobbled together, brought in, a Hashemite king, Faisal, who only ruled for like 20 days, or was booted out. But again, this mandate, French mandate, that put together a total artificiality where the French played off one power against the other and created all these divides. Then you have the Ba'athist revolution that said, okay, it's similar to what happened in Iraq. We understand we're a fake country, but we're a country. So let's make it a real country and create, Arab nationalism. And that was, the goal. I mean, Syria was part of the, United Arab Republic, together with Egypt and all this. And you saw from the very beginning. Again, I'm being superficial here because we don't have all the time in the world. History is a very complicated thing. I want to say this right off the bat. And as you said, you quoted Patrick Cogburn. Once you start pulling threads, I mean, you find out that this thing you thought was a single thing is, entity is actually a carpet woven together by millions of threads that interact in different ways and such. So, but I will say this, that you had a number of movements competing inside this artificial entity called Syria. You had the Nasserites, supporters of Nasser, the Egyptian Arab nationalists. You had the Muslim Brotherhood, which was evicted from Egypt. People need to remember that, in Syria and in conflict with Arab nationalism because it was about an Islamic state. And then you had sort of a socialist movement within Syria. And the socialist movement led to the Baathists taking over, evicting the Nasserites, and having a fundamental existential issue with the Muslim Brotherhood. So this, if you're going to say you're a Syrian nationalist, I believe I'm a Syrian and all this, who are you? What are your roots? Are you a Nasserite? Are you a Muslim Brotherhood? Or are you a Baathist? This notion that Assad comes from evil, a place of evil, is an absolute lie. 100% lie. The Muslim Brotherhood is a vicious, brutal Islamic extremist organization that seeks to slaughter anybody who doesn't agree with them. And in 1982, they launched an attack against the Syrian government. They slaughtered military officers in a military academy and their families. And the Syrian government came in and annihilated them. I'm not condoning the tactics used, but that's the truth. It's not that Hafez Assad woke up one morning and said, oh, what the hell, coffee, eggs, bacon, let's go slaughter people in Hamas. No, that's not what happened. The Muslim Brotherhood chose this fight. It was an existential fight designed to eliminate the Ba'athist regime, and the Baathists came in and eliminated the Muslim Brotherhood. So nothing happens in a vacuum. And if you forget that part of the history, then everything that goes forward after that is a lie. And the Muslim Brotherhood retreated into Turkey and elsewhere and played an important role in whatever came in 2011 after that. So we can't sit here. I don't believe anybody when they say, "Oh, I'm a peace-loving Syrian, and I was brutalized by the Assad regime." No, if you're a peace-loving Syrian, how do you identify yourself as a Syrian? If you identify yourself as a Syrian in accordance to the ideal of the Ba'athist Party, where you're trying to bring in these different people to work together as a singularity, then you have to support Bashar al-Assad. You have to support Bashar al-Assad. Assad didn't wake up in the morning and say, "I'm going to crush the Sunnis." He just said, "I don't want this. I don't want the Muslim Brotherhood here because it's evil from his perspective." the Muslim Brotherhood is looking at Assad saying, you're evil. And then, the other thing, scratch a Sunni and you get somebody who hates the Alawites. It's just immediately I had so many people say, no, in my heart, I support, we don't support the subjugation of minorities. We don't support this, the Christians, the Jews. I said, well, what about the Alawites? They're not Muslim. They're not Muslim. They must be killed. They must be eradicated. Oh my God. So you're not a religion of peace. What about the Shia? The Shia are, they are deviants. They, apostates. Shiism must be eradicated. Oh, so Hafez al-Assad, as an Alawite, has every reason to treat you Muslim Brotherhood fanatics as an existential threat to his vision of Syria. And here's the last thing for the people that take the side of the Muslim Brotherhood or anybody who's not pro vision of his Syria as Assad laid out. How quickly they sell Syria out. As soon as I engage in a conversation about what the future of Syria will be, immediately the prospect of, well, Turkey will occupy us and there will be a period of Turkish occupation in which stability will be brought forth, similar to that which existed in the Ottoman Empire. I said, so you don't believe in Syria at all. You're not a Syrian. Stop calling yourself a Syrian. You're not a Syrian. You're an Islamist. You're an Islamist who's willing to sacrifice Syrian territorial integrity so that your vision of religion, of Sharia law, can be imposed on whatever we're going to call this thing. But it's not Syria. They are willing to allow Turkey to take Idlib, Aleppo, Raqqa, which Erdogan has said are rightfully part of Syria, are part of Turkey, should never have been turned over to the French mandate, and he's going to reverse this. So, no, I reject 100% at this point in time that it's possible to be a Syrian nationalist who was opposed to Bashar al-Assad. Because I just proved to you that they're not Syrians. They're Muslim fanatics, Islamists, who are willing to sell out Syrian national integrity, territorial integrity, in support of their Islamic cause. And they feel that the Turks will enable them to pursue their Islamic cause better than Bashar al-Assad's secularism.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have 2 requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.